Certain Somalian nonprofits in Minnesota are up to some crazy things. You might have been hearing the headlines recently about Somalian nonprofits exporting millions, over $1 billion overseas to Somalia, purchasing luxury cars, luxury homes, sending it even to Somalian gangs overseas. So this information is pretty shocking. And now Governor Mike Walz of Minnesota is under intense pressure and scrutiny because people are genuinely wondering, how did all of this money get funneled overseas to Somalia, and how the hell didn't anybody look into this earlier? What's going on? So today, what made this even more shocking, and let me go ahead and share my screen and show you guys, is that today it was discovered that no, it's not just $1 billion, or it's not just millions of dollars, but it's actually over a million, over a billion. Feeding Our Future, that's the name of a nonprofit, fraud exposed by legal pressure on Minnesota officials. Basically, there is a nonprofit called Feeding Our Future. And basically, what was alleged, which is absolutely shocking, is that the COVID era child nutrition program that was part of this Feeding Our Future program, nonprofits claim to serve thousands of meals daily to low income kids, but fabricated invoices and attendance records. They funded luxury cars, homes, jewelry, and real estate overseas. Real estate overseas in Somalia. This is like, the more I read about this is actually shocking. How the hell is this going on under Tim Walz's governance? Estimated loss for Feeding Our Future alone, this specific program, is over $300 million that was exported overseas, the largest U.S. pandemic fraud. Here are the key details about this entire thing. There were over 70 defendants, mostly Somali-owned firms. Leader Amy Bach, non-Somalian, was sentenced to 5 years. Somalian co-conspirators got up to 28 years in prison. Shell companies hid laundering. They even had shell companies. It wasn't just, this was like a whole operation going on. Laundering money to shell companies, having that money go overseas, buying luxury cars. And like I said, there was also some stories, apparently, of some of this money being trafficked to Abu Shabab gang in Somalia. So 56 guilty pleas so far, specifically with this campaign, this initiative, Feeding Our Future. 7 trial convictions, and there's ongoing asset seizures. So far, over $50 million worth of assets have been recovered. So none of this is just, headlines putting this out, and there's no actual real substance to this. No, there have been convictions. People have been sentenced. Assets have been frozen that have been used based on the money that they were receiving from the federal government and from Minnesota, taxpayer dollars. The story, it just keeps getting more and more wild. I don't know how this was able to go on so long and nobody actually kept track of it. How the hell is all this money being exported, and why wasn't anybody looking into this? So let me go ahead and show you guys a little bit more about this. Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. This is coming from Minnesota Staff Reporting Committee. We let Tim Walz know of fraud early on, hoping for a partnership in stopping fraud, but no, we got the opposite response. Tim Walz systemically retaliated against whistleblowers using monitoring, threats, repression, and did his best to discredit fraud reports. Instead of partnership, we got the full weight of retaliation by Tim Walz, yada, 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 yada. Here's the thing. This is what I will say about this, because I know how people operate, and I know how the left especially operates, because I say I consider myself pretty independent when it comes to things. There is a very serious fear in the United States, and just when it comes to reporting in general, when you're talking about specific minority groups, and I'm saying this as a Palestinian. So, listen, if any minority group is talked about when it comes to terrorism right now, it's Palestinians. So, I'm not placing any sort of judgment, but what you'll notice when there are things and issues that are that have to do with specific minority groups, you'll notice the media really just doesn't want to report on that if they are concerned of coming off offensive. And I'm really getting fed up with that. Like, let's just say things out in the open as they are. If it affects a specific minority group, it affects a specific minority group. Who gives a damn? Let's just talk about it, because the more we refrain from talking about it, the more these issues pester, and people are going to start to get really pissed off. That's what I've noticed. I'm very much so done with political correctness. Let's just be honest about what's going on. No judgment. We don't need to hate people, but let's just be honest about what the hell's going on. So, anyways, I think the reason this was so hushed up is because the left simply doesn't know how to report on this because they're scared to report on this because they don't want to lose their base or something. I think there was a lot of that. Tim Walz exemplifies this pretty clearly because when he talks about it, he seems to get very defensive. Let me actually show you a recent interview he gave regarding this. It's a pretty shocking interview. Here it is. Take a listen to this here.
And sentenced for stealing. Dozens of people of East African descent have been charged, convicted, and sentenced for stealing more than $1 billion in taxpayer money from government programs during COVID. As you know, Governor, that is more than Minnesota spends each year to run its Department of Corrections. So I want to give you a chance to respond to this. Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy.
So there we go. And, I will agree with that. I think demonizing any group, any community is not okay. We shouldn't hate anybody. I don't think that's right. At the same time, though, I see somebody here responded saying, I live in Minneapolis and I am a Somali. Feeding Our Future was a statewide program. There was a minor fraud committed by Somali participants, but the Somali name is smeared by Republicans. So, MH De Niro, this is what I will say. I think that you are understating how bad the issue was, because it was a $300 million plus estimated taxpayer losses. That's not small losses. It was the largest US pandemic fraud. This is factual. There were over 70 plus defendants, 56 guilty pleas, 7 trial convictions, and so far $50 million worth of assets have been seized. So I think you're underplaying just how bad this was. Now, of course, is this being used to incite hate and dislike towards a certain community? Absolutely. And you stated you're Somalian, and I'm telling you right now, I don't think hate is okay towards any group of people. But at the same time, let's not underplay how bad the situation was, because there was a lot of funding. And like I said, one of the people that have already been charged wasn't Somalian, actually. Let's see. Amy Bach, she was non-Somali. She's already been sentenced for 5 years. So this definitely involves a lot more, but there is a lot of these firms are Somali owned. So it's important to also be honest about the facts as well, but I appreciate your take there. Of course, you're right. Where you are right is that conservatives and many people on the right are simply just using this as an opportunity to talk about the specific minority group. But the thing is, we do have to talk about the fact that the money that was exported overseas wasn't going to Europe. It was going to Somalia. That's just matter of fact. It was going to real estate overseas in Somalia. It was going to the Abu Shabaab gang thing, that specific fact where people have been saying, oh, it's been used to funnel terrorists. I did research that a bit more. And so far, like I said, not all funds went to Somalia. Much was spent on luxuries in the United States. The terrorism links remain unproven in court, with critics calling the narrative exaggerated or biased. So that's what I'm reading so far when it comes to the terrorism links regarding the Abu Shabaab gang. However, I'm going to research that a bit more in the next video and show you exactly what I found. Again, federal prosecutors emphasize individual accountability and community leaders and decry stereotyping. It goes on. Here's another program. So I told you it was over $1 billion total, guys. $1 billion. That's absolutely wild. I said $350 million from Feeding Our Future. That was one of these programs. The other program that was also involved in this was Housing Stabilization Services, HSS, Medicaid-funded program for housing vulnerable adults, seniors, and addicts, etc. Providers billed for fake services, vast majority fraudulent. $250 million. $250 million. 8 indicted in September of 2025. Somali defendants charged with conspiracy. Program terminated in August of 2025. Indictments filed. Acting U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson called it a web of fraud. So that's another one. So 350 plus 250 now we're at 600 million. Let's see what else is here. Other schemes totaling over $500 million across 28 busts since 2019. Includes 25 smaller cases, childcare assistance, Medicaid, kickbacks, clan-based networks exploited, weak oversight, 20 plus convictions, state audits show systemic gap in fraud detection. Absolutely wild. Remittance overview. Somali Americans send around $1.7 billion annually to Somalia. 40% of households there rely on it, exceeding the government's 2023 budget. I'm sure a lot of other minority groups in the United States also send their money overseas. I know that Hispanics also do that heavily. So this is not just a Somali occurrence here. Fraud proceeds were laundered via Hawala networks, informal clan-based cash transfers evading banks. Alleged flow to gangs and terror. This is what I was previously referring to. So this was from a City Journal report, and I have the report and I'm looking at it now. Cites anonymous law enforcement claiming that untold millions from fraud reached El Shabaab via Hawala taxes, so mafia-style cuts, 70% of rural Somalia. One network allegedly moved $20 million a year. A source quipped, the largest funder of El Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer. I think that's a statement there that could be exaggerated, but it kind of explains the point. This is coming from Glenn Kearns. He's a retired detective. Joint Terrorism Task Force traced similar flows from welfare fraud. Counterpoints and evidence gap. There was also, I do want to state that there was also overseas spending in Kenya as well, as well as Somalia. El Shabaab rejected the claims in a November 29th statement, calling it U.S. propaganda. But again, who wants to? I'm not going to really put too much reliance and trust in El Shabaab to tell the truth here. When it comes to U.S. taxpayer dollars, it doesn't make sense. Legitimate remittance, non-fraud are commonly for family aid. Any Somalian-bound money risks indirect extortion, but scale from fraud is unquantified. So that's just a little bit of this. It's shocking. It's genuinely shocking. I don't know how this much money was able to just get trafficked. And I think the worst part of it as well is that the money that didn't go overseas but was spent in the United States on luxury vehicles and jewelry and real estate in the United States just to, prop up these people and steal US taxpayer dollars. That's also just incredibly disheartening to hear about. We'll see how things unfold moving forward. If you found this video interesting, make sure to click the subscribe button below and give it a thumbs up as well. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video.